Welcome to the podcast, Phenomenosophy, Episode 2, Science and Religion. How you doing, Gigi?
What up, man? Doing pretty good. How you doing?
I'm well. How are things sounding?
Um, Sounding good actually. Everything seems like it's coming through, and yeah, audio sound great, man.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so subject today, science and religion. I deliberately titled it Science and Religion because oftentimes this subject is approached as science versus religion. And I feel that if we look at the value that empirical science and spirituality and religions and things like that can contribute to humanity, and especially in the form of society moving forward, I feel like this is a conversation between the disciplines of science, philosophy, psychology, and religion, spirituality, that we can gain from all of these elements and formulate a worldview that is the most beneficial for humanity moving forward. Not that you and I necessarily have that worldview. So what we're going to do is we're going to deconstruct these worldviews and kind of piece together a way of looking at these systems in a way that is beneficial for us, for humanity. And what I'd like to start off with is looking at dogma, because I feel like one of the things that has people who are ideologically bound to a particular way of thinking, whether it's science or a particular religion, or even a political philosophy. People have these ideological possessions. They're possessed by their ideology, and it makes it difficult to be open to ideas from outside that ideology that can benefit us as a whole. So really, this is an exercise in critical thinking, how we can approach various subjects from a place without being dogmatic based on our own ideological possessions or attachments that we may have. And it's, critical thinking, I feel, is important for human beings in solving problems. So we'll do that. So I'm going to start off with a little slideshow I put together. It's don't get excited. it's not graphically beautiful or anything like that. But I did want to present these elements because I feel it's extremely important in moving forward in this conversation to look at it. So let me bring up my slideshow. So here we go.
Boom.
So definition of dogma. This is out of dictionary.com. It has more definitions than this, but I felt that these two were the most relevant to what we are speaking about today. First definition of dogma: prescribed doctrine proclaimed as unquestionably true by a particular group. So a doctrine is a teaching, and to look at any teaching as unquestionably true definitely has the effect of shutting you down to any ideas or concepts from outside of that doctrine. Okay. And now again, this isn't.
Does the doctrine have to be written? Can it be verbal?
It's yeah, it could be cultural.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's something that it is either expressed or implied. However, it is held as unquestionably true. And number two definition: a settled or established opinion, belief, or principle. So that is, that applies more to sciences as far as being dogmatic in the world of science. However, I feel like definition number one also is applied, and I'm not saying necessarily with scientists. I'm not saying scientists see their own science or even the scientific laws as unquestionably true. However, people who gravitate towards or who have adopted or who are possessed by that ideology or who see themselves as, facing facts, right? And so they deny anything outside of the world of science and they grasp onto things established scientifically as truths. Now, that's not necessarily the nature of science, and scientists don't necessarily see science that way. But
I'd like to point out in this that it's specifically opinion, belief, or principle,
right,
which is things that people choose to adopt or apply in their life. But these aren't necessarily points that have had any factual backing.
no, they're not.
Meaning that the opinion of somebody is absolutely different than the fact of an event. The
Right.
opinion, the belief, and principle, those are all creations of the human brain, human mind. And the opinion, or sorry, the facts of the situation are the measurable outcomes of a specific event.
Are we distinguishing
you would say?
between are we distinguishing between truth and facts here, or are you
No, I'm just
distinguishing between
making a
opinions and facts?
yeah, the latter. Because I see a lot of people be like, well, fact is you're a jerk. And it's like, that's not measurable. There's no jerk meter. There's no physical jerkness to anybody. That's your interpretation of somebody, your interpretation of an event, like some guy giving you a dirty look or fronting or whatever the case may be.
Right. And again, it's interesting how dogmatic people are these days. I feel like the current circumstances, conditions of humanity, at least in the Western world, is one where people are so deeply possessed by their ideologies that they are latching dogmatically onto opinions as if they are truths. Now, I'm not going to really, I don't know if we'll get into the distinction. Well, yeah, exactly. I was going to say that I'm not necessarily looking today to get into the distinction of truth and fact. We may actually get there. However, it could be another conversation for another day, and I'm not entirely attached to getting there today. However, we do see people today, in today's world, holding on to opinions as if they are truths or facts. Okay, so
I think we're going to have to go there. What's the difference between truth and a fact? Because to me, the truth is subjective. The facts are, at a certain level, everything becomes subjective. But for all intents and purposes of this conversation, the truth to me would be something that you'd make up about something. You'd say, oh, that's my truth. No, or that's true for me. Or true for my experience.
We could do a whole show on my truth. And how much that statement just irritates me. Okay, so here's the distinction I'm going to draw with fact and truth. Okay, fact is an assertion that can be proven true or false. Now, that word proven could be, a little loaded, but let's say something like, it is 78 degrees in here, right? If I say that, I'm making a statement, an assertion of the temperature, which is measurable, and it can be proven true or false whether or not it is 78 degrees in here. Okay, and I'm not talking about splitting hairs. Well, technically it's 78.2. That's beside the fact. What we're talking about is facts are assertions which, through constant observation, through multiple people, can be proven to be true or false. Like, you were late. You were supposed to be here at 8 a.m. You were here at 8:15. That's an assertion which can be proven true or false, right? And so those are facts. facts. Okay. Now, truths, I would say, is something deeper. And I think, and the reason I make the distinction of the truth being on the deeper end is because that's how society, how our culture approaches that concept of truth, is that it is, that there is truth and it has more weight than facts. That facts are like, facts are facts. And then there's truths. And so the distinction I'm going to draw here is that truth is purely experiential, meaning your being, your conscious experience is truth. It is a constant. It is a flow of the flow of your consciousness is truth. That experiential piece, that what we call being in the world is truth. However, as soon as you attempt to explain it, to articulate it, to describe it, then it's not truth anymore. And so, and the reason I say that is that because the only way to articulate something is through symbols. Even when you think about it, you think in symbols. We speak in symbols. Words are symbols. They are a way of interpreting the world. So truth is that raw experience, not your explanation of the experience.
So let me ask you this. Can you have truth outside the present moment?
No, because you would think about it in symbols or you would speak about it in symbols. So truth is only ever present. It is that point of the flow of your consciousness, that is the truth, the experience you're having. Now,
and we got experience about a previous experience, and that's still truth.
Right. That's truth, but because it's
the previous experience wouldn't be, right?
Right, but if your experience and that you're having, which is based on meanings and interpretations of that past experience, those meanings and interpretations are not truth. So like you said something, I got my feelings hurt, and therefore it is truth that what you say is hurtful. That's not truth. You had an experience, and whether you could describe that experience as anxiety or whatever, the words anxiety aren't truth. That's a way of describing a sensation, an experience within your consciousness and your physical being that you're having. And then if you try to say that anxiety is caused because of meaning that you gave to this event or set of circumstances and conditions that occurred, that's not that meaning that you apply to those circumstances and conditions aren't necessarily, that's not true. Mm-hmm. The experience is absolutely true. Whatever experience you're having, but what you attribute it to and the symbols that you use to articulate it and describe it, that's not truth. So that's how I distinguish it. Yeah, that's how I distinguish fact from truth. Okay?
That's awesome. This is really important. I just had this conversation a week or two ago. I was on a camping trip with some guys, and I don't know how, but late enough around a campfire, you end up talking about all kinds of stuff. And one of the things we talked about was, let's say like a victim's mindset.
Right.
And they were like, well, we were talking about the difference between facts and the story, and I was asserting that anytime somebody claims victimhood to something, it's not a fact. It's an interpretation of an event that has happened. And I know this is controversial, but we ended up after some pretty good back and forth at this realization that in the moment of the experience, there is no victim. There is no victim. It's like as soon as the initiation of the event kicks on, you're in the experience. One micro moment later, you could turn around and say, I was a victim to that. or that was a perpetrator and I was a victim. You can start describing it, but there is no description of an experience when you're in the experience. It always happens in hindsight. And I think that's basically what you're saying. The truth is in the moment. Everything else comes after the moment.
Right. And a lot of times it's that's the meaning, right? So an
Right.
event occurs and you attribute meaning to the event. And the meaning that you attribute to the event isn't truth. The experience you're having in the presence is truth. So
I can get behind
again,
that. I like
yeah. Okay. All righty. So to finish up our few foundational elements I wanted to go over here. So I want to touch on the way that science goes from theory to law, and that it's not, at least the principles of science do not make scientific laws or don't see scientific laws as absolute. And this is important because you will find in the scientific community, psychological community, as well as the religious community, a dogmatic attachment to particular doctrines as if they are absolute truths, even though science and the way it was imagined is that a scientific law is not immutable and is not absolute. And so I wanted to show that real quick. So here you have a Venn diagram, and it shows the realm of a phenomenon of where scientific theory occurs, and you have the realm of scientific law, and you see that there's this space where they overlap, and this is where experiment and analysis and predictions occur. Okay, so that's the place where science lives, is in that in between, in that overlap between what we see and currently accept as scientific laws and what we theorize about the observations that we make about the world around us. So that's an important aspect of science, and I feel a very valuable aspect.
Let's give an example here.
Okay.
What would be an example of scientific law? I mean, theory.
Well,
is,
here. Hold on. You're getting ahead of my slideshow. Hold on.
Ooh,
Scientific law. Okay, so scientific law is the nature of scientific laws, or the nature of scientific laws has been much discussed in philosophy, but in essence, scientific laws are simply empirical conclusions reached by the scientific method. They are intended to be neither laden with ontological commitments nor statements of logical absolutes. So, an example of this would be, at one point, Newton's law of gravity, I forgot what he called it, universal gravitation or something like that, was accepted as a scientific law, and it was very effective in making predictions. So just because a law ends up not being completely factual doesn't make it not usable or not workable and not valuable. It was. In fact, to this day, you could still use Newton's equations with relation to gravity and make some really good predictions. Now, when Einstein's relativistic physics made its way into the arena of science, the approach to gravity changed, and we found that using the relativity approach gave us more accurate mathematics for making predictions around gravity, especially in the case of extremely large bodies, and probably extremely small bodies like atoms and things. So it isn't that because a law isn't absolute doesn't mean it's not valuable. Okay, and then I wanted to show that the method by which that we establish scientific laws, which we call the scientific method, is, now I'm going to read through this, but this is probably going to go over most heads, and then I'll break it down with a simple bullet point list. Scientific method is an empirical method of acquiring knowledge that has characterized the development of science since at least the 17th century. It involves careful observation, applied rigorous skepticism about what is observed, given that cognitive assumptions can distort how one interprets the observation. It involves formulation of hypotheses via induction based on such observations, experimental and measurement-based testing of deductions drawn from the hypotheses, and refinement or elimination of the hypotheses based on the experimental findings. So what is that saying in a nutshell?
A friggin' mouthful. I'm glad you have a bullet list after this.
Yes. So basically, the scientific method by which we come to scientific law is it begins with the formulation of a question based on some observation. So the question may be, why is the sky blue? And then you hypothesize, well, we know that light has each color of the spectrum has a different frequency, and that because of these differences in wavelength or frequency, that the light bends differently or is affected by elements differently. So when it's interacted with based on its wavelength or frequency, it's going to shift. And then the prediction would be, okay, well, to prove this, if we shined we're predicting what we could do in the laboratory, in order to prove our reasoning why the sky is blue. If we shined a light, like pure white light, through a prism, and a prism has less mass near its apex and more mass down towards the bottom, so the light's not hitting it. It's not going through the same amount of material as it passes through this unsymmetrical geometrical shape, right? So it enters the prism. We notice that the light that is traveling less distance is, separate. Each wavelength or each frequency of light is separated into different colors. So we actually see from white light going into the prism, we see the spectrum, a rainbow coming out the other side. And we can say, well, based on the placement of red and based on the placement of blue, that this is telling us something about the nature of light passing through medium, and what about the light is going in a certain direction. So this is the prediction we make. We test this in a laboratory, and we experiment, and we analyze our results, and then we replicate it, or we replicate it ourselves. We may get others involved in the replication process, and then once it's been replicated a number of times by a number of individuals, we can now record this and publish it and move it towards scientific law. Now, this bullet-pointed approach isn't in itself absolute. You're not going to approach every single question you have with this exact process. For some, it may not be in this order. Some of these steps may be left out, but this is the general gist of the scientific method. Okay, and it goes formulating a question. You make a hypothesis, you make a prediction, you test an experiment, then you analyze, interpret, and make conclusions about the testing, then you replicate, then you take that process, hand it off to someone else, see if they get the same results, and then come back and record or publish. So this is the method, okay? And again, it's very functional and very effective and workable in many aspects of life.
So
but
what's
not
the
all.
purpose of the scientific method? Is it to establish a record, establish scientific laws? Is it to
to make predictions? That's what it
be
comes
able
down
to
to.
accurately predict the outcomes or our experience of life? Reality.
Yes. And actually, we'll get into that because that's a large reason why we get dogmatic around ideologies, is because it's what we're comfortable with, what makes us feel safe, and being able to have an idea or make predictions about the world around us is one of the reasons we've developed religions. It's one of the reasons we've developed science and why we've really latched onto science, because science is this thing that it helped us to predict the seasons and weather patterns and all kinds of things that like make us feel a little more comfortable.
When the sun's gonna come up. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's that observation and those methods and those principles make us feel safe. And so it's in that sense, it's also valuable and beneficial.
Well, it's more than feeling safe. It's a practical, applicable tool to use day to day.
Right.
Like if nobody knew what the time was, we had no scientific model to figure out how we're going to dissect time down and what metrics we're going to use and what's a small increment of measurement, a big increment of measurement, how they all work together, and then how that aligns with stars and precessions and all kinds of stuff.
What about the concept of time itself? I mean, if you think about it from the standpoint of consciousness, there's an eternal now. It's at what point did time become something that was useful? Because
did we apply the scientific method to it?
No. Scientific method.
That's what I was just going with my thought process. I was
no.
Maybe we didn't apply scientific method to time.
No. Time's been our concept. Time has been around a lot longer than the scientific method. Not to say that people didn't have similar ways of approaching things, and it's reason and analysis and I mean logic goes back, at least within recorded history, over 1,000 years, several thousand years.
So a really good example of the scientific method is architecture. Everybody uses that system to be able to say, if you've got a certain amount of support beams and this geometry and these materials, and you do it in a certain way, you can accurately predict if a house will stay up or if it will collapse on you. After an earthquake, you can come back through and assess the integrity of a building.
Yes, but I don't know if necessarily you necessarily have to approach that with a scientific method when you have.
No.
Okay.
I'm saying the application of scientific method is applicable in our day-to-day lives, meaning without the scientific method, we would have never come to the conclusion that our architectural practices were safe. You see what I'm saying? So if nobody had practiced and tested and said, okay, an A-frame can sustain a certain amount of weight, and at this certain angle is when snow will fall off of the roof, and they go into all of the science behind why architecture is the way that it is. Because of that, we have houses that don't collapse after a week or a month or a year. And we've got some buildings on the planet that even get sturdier over time. I mean, this is a direct result of people applying the scientific method to all types of different stuff, materials, geometry, you name it. And then using those findings to interact with everybody's day-to-day life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, your internet's driving me crazy, so I'm having a hard time even like paying attention to what you're saying, because you need to get your internet fixed, dude. It's driving me crazy. It's driving me nuts. It's driving me nuts. Okay.
You can hear me okay? It's just my video, or
it's what? Your video, man. Okay. You're cutting in and out, and you're
well, this will be the last video
jumpy.
That's like this.
We'll see. Okay. So yes, I guess I see where you're coming from. I think it's maybe an over explanation or over complication of something. Realistically, that's simple mathematics. Engineering, yes, there are scientific laws in the background, but now it's just the application of a mathematical model. For like if you're an engineer and making determinations about the structure of a building, you're not having to go through the scientific method. You're just applying a formula or a series of formulas.
You don't need to go through it again. No, but it's a result of the scientific method. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, of scientific law, and that's, and like I said, whether or not the scientific laws at play there are immutable truths is irrelevant. They may not be, but they're workable, and they're pretty good because they've allowed us to build things the way that we have built them, and they stand up to our predictions of stress and weather conditions and all kinds of other things. So yes, it's not necessarily an immutable truth, but it's workable. And that's cool. And so that's not something you'd necessarily want to toss out, which is funny, and again, we're talking about these ideologies and how they've been at odds with each other. So I don't know if you've heard of what they call the science wars, right?
I actually haven't.
Okay, so there's what they call there's an ideology known as postmodernism philosophy, and one of their tenets is that there's an infinite way of interpreting anything, right? And therefore, science is just a series of interpretations with no real meaning, right? No real truth, right? We'll say that. There's no truth to science because everything that went into its development was done by human beings, which were interpreting things, and they, latched on to a specific way of interpreting, and that led to, science developing to where it's at today.
So the argument is that science is just one interpretation. Science is meaningless because there's this one interpretation of a infinite sea of interpretation.
Right. And in some sense that's true, right? And
right.
So let's look at that. In some sense that's true.
You could interpret it in any way
you could interpret anything anyway. However, what interpretations are effective and workable, right? Because you could say that the law of gravity has to do with something else entirely, and would it be applicable? And would it, and would it be applicable? And would it get us to space? Right? We even if all we had was Newtonian physics, we probably could have got into space, right? Even though by the time we went there in the 60s,
we would have gotten back.
Maybe not. Maybe not. I don't know how advanced the mathematics was at that point, but yeah, you're probably right. We might not have made it back, at least safely. And it was like, well, where'd he go? Well, we don't know. So, he went up. Well, did he come down? Yeah, but we have no idea where. And Earth's a big place. So yeah, I mean, the fact that even if it is interpretation, and the laws and the applicability of the principles have gotten us some fascinating results. Now let's look at the other side of this as well, because there are these elements of life which you cannot apply the scientific method to. And so you're not going to necessarily get a workable worldview or a workable way of approaching things that's necessarily beneficial for humanity moving forward. For example,
that's a cool way to think about and work with science, because that is the fundamental assumption, I think, of science and the scientific method is that yes, there's an infinite number of interpretations of our measurements and what our experiments have put out.
Mm-hmm.
However, this one is what we're going with right now. That's why they call it a theory of relativity, for instance.
Right.
Because down the line, we may do another experiment that fine-tunes this or that overthrows this and explains it in a greater degree. So the whole point of science is to find an interpretation that works. And it's always open to another interpretation that works better. Well,
okay, hold on. Let me stop. Yeah, let me stop you there. Yes,
okay.
By its foundational principles, it should be open, but it's not necessarily, because
not always.
Here's the problem: you come through. You're a physicist, right? And you learned physics in a certain way, and so you're now very attached to the way you interpret physics. It's hard for you to accept something outside of your realm of expertise as being a fact or truth, right? So, and that's really where I want to get to here, is because, like, if you look at, like, with the advance of science from the, from 1600s up until now, there's been this division among of ideology among people who are religious and spiritual and people who latch on to that, fully automatic model of the world, of the scientific worldview, that they're at odds. And the reason there's this at oddsness is that there's a failure to recognize and a failure to be open to the ideas, the principles that are workable that are really the best for humanity. So, for instance, like in the material sciences, there's not really a recognition of consciousness. Now, psychology is the closest thing, because it is a science of mind and it does address consciousness and unconscious and things like that. But it doesn't necessarily believe that any practitioner of psychology believes that consciousness is anything more than chemical reactions in the brain.
Product.
Right. And that's in this, because if you're attached to the empirical methods of scientific method of establishing facts, well, you're missing out on really what I consider a quite significant part of reality, which is consciousness, our interpretation, our experience of the world itself. We've poo-pooed on that throughout the centuries, because as we've developed this scientific method and things, we've also come up with this worldview that your perspective is the subjective aspect of reality. It is not fact or truth, right? So we kind of separate it over here, and then there's what we consider the objective reality, and that in the scientific method, it's being able to get it out of your way as much as you can. That's why they recognize scientific law isn't absolute, because there's this subjective thing in the background making the observations. So that's recognized. However, consciousness is a pretty important aspect of our experience here on Earth. Not only that, relationships, right? Pretty important. Whether it be personal relationships between individuals, whether it be family, whether it be community. Communities get bigger. You have nation states. I mean, the world itself, we live in a global community where really everyone can influence everyone else and can communicate with everyone else. So if ever there was a time in our development as human beings to be open, this is the time, because there's so many ideologies out there. And what we really need to be able to do is to not be so ideologically possessed, perhaps, and let's take a look and dissect these various ways of looking at the world and see, okay, and the most effective way of us approaching this or thinking about this that is going to prop us up, push us forward, is the best thing for the community, the nations, the humanity, as well as the planet itself, right? And it's funny, because a lot of these, what used to be, you took the worlds of science and religion, they used to be here, but as time has gone on, elements have started to mix in. Like now there's this clinical approach to mindfulness, right? Like if you were to assert, let's say 80 years ago, in the world of science, the importance of, meditation and mindfulness and the effects that has on the physical wellness of the body, the mental wellness, and how you may be able to overcome that, because there was no empirical evidence, no experimentation, that was a completely rejected idea or concept. And now there's a clinical approach to applying these concepts of mindfulness in modern scientific context. Now, is that new? Not to spiritual people. Like a Buddhist would say, yeah, no shit. Like that's not new. Like yes, being coherent in mind and body, and a person who practices transcendental meditation they've been talking about the physical and mental and emotional benefits of this for thousands of years. These aren't new, but it's new in that now some of these things are being adopted and brought into sciences, but still refusing to recognize that in tradition, in culture, we have a lot of wisdom. Like when they decided to just do away with all the herbal remedies that we've been using for thousands of years as human beings, because, oh, well, we've got all these chemicals now, right? And that because, oh, well, mankind, we're much more advanced than we were then. So we know a lot more than those stupid people back then. So we're going to get rid of all the plants and herbs that we've been using for centuries. I mean, eons, thousands of years, humanity has used herbs and foods and things like that with the awareness and knowledge that the way you eat, what you eat, how you eat is extremely important. And in the earlier parts of the 20th century, that was not considered important. What you ate, what you ingested, it was like they looked at people as machines, and food is purely as a fuel for energy, right? That's why you have this whole fascination, this attachment to the concept of calories, which are meaningless. That model only applies if you only look at food as a fuel source, and a human being is something that just burns the fuel to run. But now, again, ancient knowledge, traditions that go back thousands of years are now being recognized within science that these are important. Like what you eat is important. Who knew, And
why?
Exactly. And why? And how different herbs and what you eat can have medicinal effects on the body.
Even when you eat.
Right. So it kind of goes both ways. And then because of the dogmas of religion, there's been a resistance to new ways of looking at the world. So one of the greatest values of religion is the values of religion, right? The principles we live our lives by. Yeah. Those are important for us to move forward, for us to have a future. There has to be some kind of agreed upon system of morals and ethics by which we treat each other.
There's something in here that I'm just now noticing where, I mean, it's been assumed that science and government and really like even our commercial systems all have human progress and human benefit as like the foundational motivation for any of those, which in my experience, it hasn't been. Even going all the way back to like, oh, we have all of these new chemicals now that we're going to start using as medicines and do away with all these other things. We don't need the excess. We're going to extract the one thing, the active ingredient, and inject that right into you. Even that to me wasn't because we know more.
After we modify
millions of years.
After we modify the active ingredients so we can patent it.
That's where I'm going. That's where I'm going with it. Because you can do that. Right. However, the whole thing was predicated on commerce. Because now we can own this specific group of molecules and chemicals and stuff. Then we can turn around and sell it, and people can inject it and run it. It's a whole commercial system.
Right.
It's not built on the idea that we've come so far as a race, and now we can, never be sick again. There are plenty of things that do better than, like, even now people are like, oh, you have headaches and stuff. Meditate. Take a hot bath. You put essential oils on your head or something like that.
Right.
Instead of Advil and all these other things, which for me never worked. But I'm noticing a connection here now. In listening to you talk about that and then religion, it's almost as if that's what religion has contributed. The idea that us coming together can produce something better.
Right.
That if you prescribe yourself or live your life based off a certain set of principles or morals or whatever philosophies even, then you can have stronger relationships, you can have more happiness, you can have a higher level of life.
Mhm.
And we've taken that and then superimposed it on science. Well, we've taken it and superimposed it on commercial systems and legal systems blindly. Even I've been thinking for a while now where this need to make money as being more important than the need to thrive as a people, where that came from. Like, since when did we start, I guess, going down that road?
Well, I think it probably has something to do with the correlation in our mind that material wealth is what you need to thrive. So it's just
It's kind of newer though, right? I mean, religion has been saying you don't need stuff to thrive for a long time.
Yeah, but it didn't mean people didn't have stuff. Yeah, you're right. They've been saying you don't need stuff, but it didn't mean people didn't have stuff. And yes, I would say what you're talking about is symptomatic of the division. We experience division in the world because of attachments to the various ideologies, right? And that division is keeping people from sharing ideas and being dynamic, being fluid in their ideas, as opposed to rigidly stuck to an idea. So if we, again, like I said, one of the greatest values of religion are the values of religion. It's not the only value of religion. There are other aspects of spirituality and religion that are extremely valuable. However, if you're stuck on the dogma, the dogmatic elements of your religion, the doctrine, and like the models of the nature of let's say the planet itself, the Bible ain't going to get you into space, but physics will. Not that we need to go into space, but what I'm demonstrating there, what I'm illustrating is that the attachment to, your interpretations of your religion as absolute truths, right? That's the dogmatic approach. And in resisting science, and at the same time, science doing the same thing and resisting principles of religions, right? Like meditation, well, in Western religion, contemplation, contemplative prayer. In modern science, and I'm not going to say necessarily in all fields of psychology, but in modern science, from the mechanistic point of view, the mechanistic materialistic worldview, that you're just a machine and the result of chemical reactions, contemplative prayer, because we can't empirically measure something beneficial in a double-blind study about it, doesn't exist, or as something beneficial for men or mankind, I should say. However, experientially speaking, many can speak about the tremendous benefits they've gotten from things like contemplative prayer, transcendental meditation, and things like that. These are things that people can speak like, yes, this has changed my life significantly in my physical being, in my emotional being, in the way that the cognitive behavior of individuals. Now, many psychologists do recognize these aspects because they deal in, thoughts and feelings and cognition. So they're more open to the ideas that, and their science, it is considered a science. Their science is rigidly based on this empirical method of establishing what's effective. Now, I'm not saying psychology doesn't necessarily have psychological laws. It's a very fluid discipline, which may be its greatest asset, is that it can evolve and transform because it has nothing rigid to really latch onto. From Freud.
How do they apply the scientific method to psychology?
They don't. That's what I'm saying. They have to be more fluid. I mean, they like in psychiatry, you can, in that maybe drug effects, right? Like when we're testing it, and now that's why I made the distinction. Psychiatry.
You can measure chemical makeup, chemical compounds and saturation levels and stuff in the body, but that doesn't necessarily correspond to the experience.
Right, but psychology, the science of psychology, is more centered around mind and behavior than so it's about, yes, as a psychologist, I'm getting results with my clients in that they're no longer abusing themselves or addicted to some alcohol or something else. So you can see there are measurable results, but you can't say that. A psychologist can't say, oh, this is what you do. You say this to them, you say this to them, you say this to them, and then they're done with alcohol. That's not how it works. There is no here is the method to get someone to not be an alcoholic. Boom, done. It's settled. That's it. That's all there is to it. It's not like that. It's a fluid kind of a science. And so,
but maybe they do go after it with experimentation and hypothesis.
They do. They absolutely do.
Testing. Yeah.
Yeah,
so there is a version of the scientific method there, but it doesn't deal in physicalities. It deals in whatever the results may be. Hypothesis.
This is what's
going on.
Yeah, it's what's workable, what's effective, right? You're looking at the results. Like, well, we got these results, right? And if many psychologists can get these types of results using this particular method, then it's an effective method. It doesn't mean this is the way of handling something. It means here is a method. It is effective to a relatively acceptable degree or whatever, because that's just the nature of that, because you're dealing with consciousness and mind, and so it's not the same as physical science. It's not the same approach. It's not the same. It's not as rigid in that sense, that there's more of an openness to it all.
Yeah, there's never been a psychological theory that says if you give 100% of people this medication or this practice or this procedure, that it will fix 100% of them.
Right.
Where you've got scientists in other fields saying, if you drop a ball at this height and you measure it, 100% of the time it will drop at this speed and take this much time and blah blah blah.
Right.
So it's not as cemented in its discoveries.
Right. Yeah.
It can't be.
Hey, exactly. It's got to be fluid. And here's the thing. It's like, I feel that if we look at the world of the material sciences and the world of religions, that taking on that fluid aspect that psychology has to have would probably be extremely beneficial. Because, like, for instance, the religious concept, the doctrine of, like, the age of the earth. And so, and again, it doesn't say
how old it is.
Yeah, it doesn't say outright. This is people interpreting ancient writings to mean that, oh, well, the earth is 6,000 years old. Now that's, and for the most part, there's many people in Western religion who have seen, like, okay, yeah, that's a way of interpreting that, but they're not as stuck in that dogma. However, there's this whole other world of religious followers, practitioners, who are so rigidly attached to the dogmatic doctrine that they can't let go of it, and it's absolute for them. And so because they're so attached to that particular doctrine, to when science comes on and says, yeah, well, based on our observations and measurements, and again, this is an absolute, but this is a pretty, the methods they're using are pretty effective. We predict that the world is 4 billion years old and been around for 4 billion years. Now, here's where I want to go with this. I feel that the greatest values of religion aren't its explaining the physical reality. Now, that's not where it thrives, and that's not where we need it. Understanding physical reality is useful in certain set of contexts. It's really immaterial when it comes to us coming together in a loving and caring way, which I believe is what I feel that like things like religion and spirituality offer the most, is that there's something definitely lacking in our world today that is eating away at the social fabric of our society, in that we no longer, there's a high level of distrust between people, and there's a lot of disconnection, even in small communities. So, and again, if our approach to religion was really, rather than the dogmatic elements that are not workable as far as interpersonal relationships and building community and things like that, that if we were more fluid in that, rather than seeing it as these are absolute truths, we see it as this is a set of tools for us to be better, to move forward, to grow, to evolve. And because we kind of do see science that way, is like its purpose is not only to make predictions for us to feel safe and sound, but it's also tools for advancing humanity. However, because there is no place for our interpersonal relationships, and again, in psychology there is, but it's not. Psychology isn't doing anything for the social fabric at this point. Has little effect on few individuals at any one time. It's not something that can be applied in mass. I should take that back, because it can be applied in mass, because we see it through television programming. People will react to imagery,
even more so
information,
social media.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there is a psychological effect there, and
there's even a whole documentary about what's her name from Cambridge Analytica, where she, sorry, I'm probably getting a little far away from my mic, where she goes through and explains, we've got over 500 data points on any one individual in the United States, or however many millions of them. Mm-hmm. And she's like, we only really need about, what did she say, 17 data points or something like that to influence and win a presidential election. I'm like,
right.
And you've got over 500 on millions of Americans and people in other countries as well, not just over here.
Right.
And that is dealing strictly with mass psychology.
Right.
Because the more you see certain images and certain beliefs and certain parades and certain events and whatever else, the more you're either challenged or confirmed in your worldview, more or less.
Right. Yeah. And it's and it goes both ways.
Yep.
So I feel like the elements of worldview that I find valuable, and like I said, it's hard for me to speak necessarily in terms of religion, because I'm not speaking about a particular religion.
Or even religion in general, right?
Yeah, because religion is a set of doctrine. It is a specific set of teaching. However, spirituality is a little woo-woo and doesn't really mean anything. So I'm kind of going to mash these together because there are people who aren't necessarily see themselves as belonging to a particular religion. However,
they all practice similar things, believe in similar. Sorry,
right.
I cut you off again. Go ahead.
Yeah, they may hold that certain ethics and morals are important, and they may even have their own way of interpreting the metaphysical universe in a way that, again, I don't feel that the metaphysical interpretation of the universe is necessary, that you necessarily need to have facts about that in order to say that coming together in a loving and caring way is absolutely beneficial for people and for communities. So I don't want to limit it to religion, because I don't want to say everyone out there should go be religious. I'd say it's everyone out there that as a community, we should come together and agree upon like ethics and morals and create something whereby we can come together. Because this is what a church offers, right? Whether it's a church, a synagogue, a mosque, temples, like these are places where people come together in a loving, caring, non-judgmental way. Typically, that's the idea, at least. And in that space, that's the intent. And in that space, you build trust, you form bonds, and this is absolutely beneficial. I don't want to say it's absolutely necessary. It's not, but if we look at where humanity is going now, would us coming together within smaller groups of people to form bonds, to share of ourselves, to form trust, is that something that could be beneficial for us in the directions that we're heading?
It's like the same with vegetables. They're not necessary, but they're definitely beneficial.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's and that's why I wanted to have this conversation, as opposed to science versus religion, right? Is that material sciences have tremendous value. Psychological science has tremendous value, and religions and philosophies and spiritual practices have tremendous value. The problem is when our dogma and our attachment won't allow us to be open to these other things that could be greatly beneficial to us. So let's take a brief look at the religions, because not all religions, but some religions that deny the legitimacy of other religions. They deny the sacredness of other individuals, right? I mean, it was religious belief that had people being burned at the stake. And mind you, these people the people who were watching this happen, they weren't in a place of like, oh my God, like we're burning people alive, this is horrible. Because of their deep-seated belief, they were in a place of like, oh, relief. Like, oh, we've helped this person out. They were for sure going to burn for eternity in hell. Now they only got to burn for about an hour and they're good. Like it was like seen as a place of mercy and grace, that like we're helping you out, and so it wasn't necessarily
where in Bible it talks about that, because I'm
people?
no Bible buff. No, not even burning people. But like,
I love it talking about burning people.
If you're a witch, and the definition of a witch,
there's
in
not
need of being burning, and I'm like, just like with
This
the
is
whole
interpretations.
like,
These are
okay,
interpretations.
because that's
But
been my
but even if
experience
you look at the
mostly
Bible,
of
and again, you have to be able to let go. And again, the churches have, religions have, they have grown, but there's resistance. Whereas if it was like, let's just let go of these elements that aren't really necessary or moving us forward or bringing us together, right? If we look at what's important, what are the morals and ethics that as human beings we stand by, right? That we say, yes, these are absolutely important things. Because then we can look at like if we look at the sanctity of life, right? And the if you look at like the Old Testament, right, which Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, all based in the Old Testament, there were several crimes that the punishment was like stoning to death. We're just going to kill you with rocks. I mean, that's not a very humane way to deal with someone, especially when you consider that their crime wasn't even a violent crime or anything. Not to say that even a violent criminal should be stoned to death or be put to death at all. But if we believe in the sanctity of life, which that is in religion, the belief in the sanctity of life. So you can see how over the centuries, like we no longer stone people to death. That's probably a good thing. They've kind of let go of that, right? And so there is, even within religion, is like, I know there's sticklers who like it's like that. It's almost like when you look at like political ideology of the progressive liberal versus the conservative, it's like the conservatives want to hold on. They don't want things to change because they feel safe in what has been. And the progressives have more of that rebellious archetype where they want change and they blame their suffering on what was, so not that one is right or one is wrong, because it's both are needed. A forward looking in what's possible is necessary for us as human beings to evolve, to grow, to move forward, but also looking at traditions, because traditions and what we've had are also valuable and beneficial. What it's definitely valuable for us to be discerning on what's not working for us anymore, like stoning people for having extramarital affairs. Like, I don't know, pretty inhumane. So we've kind of let go of that, right? And I think it's for the better, and it's just, I feel that if we were this way, if we were in all these worldviews, if whether you attach yourself to a scientific ideology, whether you attach yourself to a religious ideology, that by letting go of the ideologies themselves and by looking more to principles and recognizing that each worldview has value and benefit. And when we're clear on the principles that we value, then we can be clear on what things we can accept and just being at least open to, how could modern medicine been much more advanced had it been accepting of ancient wisdom, of like, look, man, just because they lived a couple thousand years ago didn't mean they didn't know their shit. Like, maybe these plants, these herbs are valuable, and maybe they can be applied in the way that they had been applied. You can't just throw it all out and say, oh, well, they were stupid people. And that's part of the mentality around this, is that, I'm a big tough guy and I face facts. That's a lot of people who gravitate towards and who attach themselves to that scientific ideology is like, oh, no, I'm not going to believe in mythology, and that's just, superstition. And yeah,
what would you say would be the result if people didn't so much attach to ideology, whether it be in any of these domains you're talking about, versus being attached? Because we kind of see the result of some being attached and some being unattached,
right?
So far. but what would it really look like practically in life to have really that fluidity? Been like, yeah, this is what I'm subscribing to, but I'm also open to other stuff. I'm open to challenging that. I'm open to adopting new things, throwing some old things out.
Right.
Like being grounded in principle and saying, this principle is aligned with this, so I'm going to take this ideology.
Right.
Oh, and all of a sudden we're stoning people. I'm kind of not for that, so I'm going to look for another ideology that aligns with my principle. What would that look like practically today?
Yeah, in today's world, it's not. I'd say we have a lot of work to do to get to a place where we can even have conversations about coming together over principles. Because when I look out at the world, my assessment, this isn't an absolute truth. It's not even an assertion. It's an assessment that I ground on my observations. My assessment is that there is a large portion of the population that are ideologically possessed. And the mention of looking at and being
Possessed.
open to a concept or an idea that falls outside of your ideology is like sacrilegious. I mean, you have
Let's talk about the possession of that. Are you saying some people are possessed by ideology, or that they're so desperately affixed to their possessed ideology that
no,
they refuse to let
they're
go?
possessed by it. For
Explain
and
that.
what I attribute that to is really, again, it's our. Let's look at some of the fundamental things that I've observed, and I'm not saying they're truths, but it's something I've observed that's common within many human beings. Is we have, for one, we have a need or a desire to be comfortable. We have a need or desire to be right. And in those two, in the need and desires to be right and to be comfortable, we latch on to ideas. Because for one, we also are uncomfortable in not knowing. Because in not knowing, there's uncertainty. And in uncertainty, there is fear. So in not knowing, in an uncertainty, we look to an authority for knowing, for knowledge, for understanding, right?
Information,
Right.
direction.
So if there's and right now the way I'd say the biggest ideologies that people latch onto are religious and political. I'd say those two are the biggest that I've seen. And so for instance,
Yep.
you have, and it's funny, I mean, it's literally a polarization of black or white and left, and it's left or right, right? Right now, where there's a particular platform which plays into the personality types and archetypes of individuals, and and they're separated into two different, political parties. And along with these political ideologies, if I adopt it and I feel good about it, and I can be right about it, now that it gives people a sense of comfort, and that it's not something I just made up, right? So because I have a need for there to be an authority, right? So there's higher ups that know more and know better, and I'm grasping onto that. The problem I see with that is that what it does is it takes away, especially in these modern ideologies where there's no room for openness or expansion or changing anything about the ideology. It's very rigid. And so there's no thinking. No
It's like an
thinking.
all or nothing
It is.
aspect too.
Yeah.
It's not like I love it all except for the stoning part.
Right.
It's like, no, you got to love the stoning
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have a group of people running around calling themselves anti-fascists, and if you're not a part of their group, you're a fascist. I mean, that's how they see the world. It's black or white.
Linguistically, that's where they stand. It's anti something, and so if you're not anti,
then you're for. Exactly. Yeah.
There's no, I don't know. Like when someone brought that term up to me, and I was like, what does the "fuh" stand for? I think I know what anti means. Like, well, you've been under a rock, and I'm like, dude, I guess. I'm like, I'm the rare bud in the middle of the storm, just like,
right.
I don't know what any of these people are fighting about.
Right.
I better go Google something real quick.
Yeah. And I'd say, and that polarization is, I mean, it's present in all ideologies right now, where it's like I've even, it's funny, I saw it the other day, an anti-racist. Like now there's this concept of anti-racist. And if you're not these things and you don't hold these ideas, then you're a racist. And I'm like, wow, like that's interesting. It's not thinking. What it is like, here's an ideology. You either buy in or you're labeled this. You're labeled the opposite of what this ideology purports to be, right? So if we call ourselves the anti-fascists and we call ourselves the anti-racist, well, then anyone outside of that is racist and fascist, right? And
it's more than just these political domains.
Oh, it is absolutely.
This is saturated. This is. I'm noticing more and more. It's not just, all of these like buzzwords and keywords and phrases and antis and pros that we're seeing out there. But this is like, in dealing with people's own experience, I'm seeing more and more polarization.
Right.
In one's experience and how they identify and how they define their experience and how they live throughout their lives. It's taking a position on absolutely everything. And I'm not clear as to why or where that's coming from, but I've been noticing it more and more and more. And it almost feels like 2020, we've gone parabolic with it.
Right.
Where there is no middle ground anymore. And I'm even feeling alienated standing in the middle.
Right.
I'm having a hard time connecting with people when they're like, oh, so what do you think about the, say, COVID vaccine? And I'm like, I don't know anything about it. Like, well, are you pro or anti-vaxxer? And I'm like, I think some vaccines could be fine and some maybe not so fine. They're like, well, what, I mean, okay, you're kind of pro and anti. I don't know what to do with you. And they almost like dismiss anything that I have to say and let it go.
Right.
And that's been more and more and more of the things I've seen on media, on TV, in conversations. Even I just met somebody like last weekend, hanging out, having a great conversation. And it came down to like, oh, well, where do you stand? I was like, well, what do you mean?
On the floor.
Are you pro or are you anti? Are you for? Are you against? And I had no answer. And I think that's the point in which you're referring to is the affixing, the attachment, the need to cling to whatever polarity, because the middle is unsure, the middle is unsafe, the middle is open for new stuff.
Right. Well,
the new ideas, new beliefs.
And again, it's speaking right into what we were just talking about, which is you know what?
There's no principles,
an easy
either,
word
which
for
really
it.
is the biggest thing.
It's tribalism. It's tribalism, and what and the need to belong, the need to be right, the need for the tribe, right? And so that's why you've got this polarized division, is because of all that's going on, right? And I think an epidemic or a pandemic is definitely something to get something like this ignited. Not that it began with this pandemic. It is something that's definitely you've been seeing for years, decades.
This is
and
the pandemic
this polarization
is a symptom of this.
Yeah, and but it's definitely powder keg. It's kind of accelerated this division, this
But see,
divisiveness.
I don't know that they're separate.
What do you mean? What's separate?
The whole experience of 2020 and the pandemic and all the stuff that has happened,
Mhm.
and this accelerated polarization of ideologies. Like
Right.
literally,
Right. I see what you're saying.
like even at the beginning with the whole conversation about masks and stuff.
Mhm.
But it was like, oh, there are countries that have been wearing masks and they've had some good benefits, and we're going to do it too. And we had medical professionals, we had CDC people, we had politics all the way to the top level being like, they're not going to protect you. They're not going to protect your neighbor. Like, no big deal.
Right.
And no, it'll probably end up having you touching your face more and potentially infecting yourself at a higher likelihood.
Right.
And then a month, 2, 3 later, they're like, okay, we're going to issue mandates and everybody needs to wear a mask. And it's like, this polarity is not working. We need to go to the other side. No one ever stopped and said, if it makes you feel better, wear one.
Right.
It's choice.
Right.
It's in the middle. And so it's regardless of what the science says, because I haven't seen a single person in politics, I'll say, because I've dove into the case studies, the double blind studies, the science and stuff behind all of it. But that's beside the point, because the point is that nobody out there is really even interested in that conversation.
Right.
To bring up even talking about masks, and I kind of feel hesitant to do it on this call, but even bringing that up around anybody, they automatically go, oh, you're one of those. Like, if you don't wear a mask, you're all of a sudden on the right, Trump lover, racist, only
Fascist.
care about yourself.
Racist, inconsiderate, fascist,
oh no, and I'm even wearing a
Trump
red shirt.
loving. Yeah. So it's
although my shirt says love heals, so it's a little bit of the
dude. It might as well. It might as well say "Make America Great Again." But that's and you're exactly right. And the polarization is in every aspect, or it's with every ideology. It's like the feeling of uncertainty has become great. The fear. There's a fear that tribalism isn't helped by fear. You gravitate more and you lean in more. You double down on your ideology and your attachment to one, because there's fear, there's uncertainty. Yeah, there's fear, there's uncertainty. So it's like bam, like even if you weren't ideological before, it's like now you want to attach yourself to something because you want to be part of a group, because and you're going to attach yourself to a group that already aligns with your existing worldview. So you already have presuppositions about the world, and so that's why you have this tribalism occurring, where it's groups are huddling in and they're doubling down on their ideologies, and you're having it in every corner, and it's like there is no middle way here, and there is no middle ground. It's because the tribes are because of the fear, the uncertainty. But here's the thing, that causes more fear and uncertainty. Like it's right. This it's the snowball. It's the snowball effect now, that if we don't come to a place of critically thinking for ourselves and letting go of these ideologies we latch onto, this snowball could do some damage, because that's where we're heading. Because if you can't think critically and really bring ideas together and have people come together Because I mean, that's what you see is people attacking each other, not only on Twitter, and verbally, but physically. People are attacking each other physically. Yeah. And
because of an idea they have.
Right.
Because of a group they identify with. Because of how they associate.
Yeah.
Like I've been saying, it's not a war between people right now. It's not like, I'm not even going to get racial or anything like that. It's not about any specific groups of people. It's about what ideas you subscribe to. And if my idea is in conflict with your idea, well, then we're in conflict.
Well, then F you, man. That really
blows my mind.
Yeah, that's the attitude people have taken. Whereas it's funny, I grew up in the 80s, and I remember there was, there were still political parties and everything back then, but there was, compared to now, like there was, and again, maybe where I grew up in, Huntington Beach, which is an affluent part of Orange County in Southern California. So it's not the inner city, but what I saw was a lot more moderation. Like there was no hardcore right wing, hardcore left wing, like that. It just wasn't it wasn't a part of the narrative, and even religion. Like people were more accepting of other people's religion, and it didn't really matter, and as I've grown and as I've gotten older and I've watched this go from like people more in the middle, like yeah, they may have their political ideology that takes them one way. They may have their religious beliefs that have them this way, but it wasn't a polarization that created hatred and tribalism. And I've seen that has been this steady kind of move. I mean, I remember, like I'd say when I was most surprised was like when George W., the younger, was president.
Junior?
Yeah. Well, he's not a junior. Yes. George W. was president, and I watched a group of support our troops and anti-war, right? This is during the
end the war.
Yeah, end the war and support our troops. Now, here's the thing. Those messages they're not against each other. You can be for the ending of a war or against a war and for supporting our troops, right? And
which realistically, if you brought all the troops home and into the war, they'd all be safe.
Right. And then think about it. What's at the foundation of wanting either one of these? Is like you want people to live, you want them to be safe, you don't want there to be fighting, right? And I watched these two groups go to war with each other, like hitting each other with their signs, and I'm just like, whoa. And I'm like, and that hit me as profound in that moment because I'm like, wait a minute. Like, you're anti-war and you're attacking people right now. You're for supporting the troops and you're like they're saying end the war. That will support the troops. You know what I mean? Like I didn't get, like, it just blew my mind that these two groups were going at it with each other and just going to war because of, really, it had to do with political ideology. It had nothing to do with, and now that compared to today is minor. It's minor, but it was.
That doesn't even make the news.
Right. But it was, if you were on the left, if you were a Democrat, well, then you were against the war. If you were on the right and you were a Republican or a conservative, well, then you were for supporting the troops. You weren't necessarily for war, but you were for supporting the troops. It's like what we've seen with like what you were just talking about with the masks. Like, masks became a political thing. Like, if you wear one, you're a Democrat. If you don't wear one, you're a Republican. How is that? Like, how is that a political decision?
Or you're anti-science or something.
Right, and that which is funny coming. Yeah, that, like I said, that's a conversation.
We're not going to go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, because getting politics into the science conversation is a whole other. This isn't politics and science. This is science and religion. So we'll stick with religion for now. and we'll bring
Which
politics.
really, like,
It's
people aren't getting pissed off at each other for looking a certain way or being a certain way, or it's what group they identify with,
right.
what ideology is behind everything that they do in their life. And it's got to come from some need to polarize, to attach to an ideology, or a complete unconscious decision of which one they're subscribing to. Like, I don't consider myself a racist.
Mhm.
Like, I've got such mixed blood in me. It's be very hard to find a group of people that I cannot associate
Right.
and let alone hate them.
Right.
So when I think about, like, if I was completely just, I guess, new to the situation,
Mhm.
and somebody said, "Hey, are you racist?" and I was like, "No," they're like, "Ah, you're with us." I'm like, okay, cool. And I would walk over there and I'd stand there, great. So no, none of us are racist. We're all for, like, people and human rights and fairness and love and dove and all this. Oh, that's great over here. Then somebody comes up and challenges that. I'd hear their opinion. I'd listen to it out and stuff. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm over here then. I should talk to these guys about. And nope, all of a sudden I'm on the other side. It's like, if one of the principles is something that you agree with, you're all in or all out.
Right.
And I don't know how and when that trend started, versus I kind of like what these people say. I kind of like what these people say. I'm going to take that and kind of live my life with it.
Right. And that's what I would say. What I feel like the reason I wanted to use this subject, speak into this subject, is for that very reason. Is because there is no questioning. You may have bought into an ideology that at its core, or at your core, is violating something that you hold as a principle, right? But you refuse to question it because you're, again, that need to belong, that need to be right, that tribalism that is manifesting right now. It's secure, it's safe, and that need to be safe and secure is allowing you to go about your life without questioning or thinking critically about anything. And more than anything else, I wanted to pull apart these worldviews because that's a practice of critical thinking. Like, I could have come in and attached myself to an ideology and made this into a versus conversation and taken a position on it. But critical thinking is, you're most effective as a critical thinker when you can let go of any presuppositions and any positions you hold,
or at least suspend for a moment.
Exactly. Yeah, because you can believe in God and be critical of religion. You could believe in Newton's law of gravity and be critical of physics. It's
challenge it.
Yeah, it's this. I must be an unquestioning, right? But that's dogma. That's why I brought that into the conversation at the beginning. That's why I put my fancy slideshow together, was because dogma is what that is this unquestioning of a doctrine and not being open to anything outside your ideology, right?
It reminds me of growing up and taking everything my parents said as a fact. Never challenging what they said. Not until I turned 18 and I was like, my parents are liars. Then I don't believe anything that they believe. It was that type of polarization. And it may be that's why, like, the majority of all of this conflict is in the younger generations. I don't know.
Well, here's an interesting thing. And again, it's something I observed when I was younger. And it speaks, I think it happens for most people before 18. Maybe you're a late bloomer. But at about the age of, I would say between the ages, for me, it happened early. Like I was questioning things at like 10, 11, and I'm like, nah,
ever since Santa
that ain't
Claus.
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there, I've always been skeptical, of other people's assertions. But what I've noticed is that at about your teenage years, you, and I noticed this in my peers going through school, there's a complete rejection for many, not all, for many, of religion and authority and things like that. And I feel it's a very beneficial step for people to take, for young people to take, because you can reject all the mythology, and when I say mythology, I'm not talking about like a false story. I mean the imagery, right? Like in its truest sense of the word, the imagery, the doctrines of religion, of the images of the world and the images of God and things like that. Because when you reject a particular religion, you can actually open yourself up to ideas and ways of looking at spirituality that are more encompassing, that feel more profound for you than buying into an imagery. And the funny thing is, then you could go back into the religion, and you would have a completely different approach to the religion, because you're like, okay, yes, I don't see God as grandpa in the sky, sitting in a chair, but because I was able to reject that imagery, I was able to come to a deeper sense of the metaphysical and than I would have had I not rejected it and just bought in. So there is value for people to reject their ideas, that the ideologies, the worldviews, and completely challenge them, because there's a growth. Growth can happen. I'm not guaranteed, because what was so surprising to me was that, again, looking at my peers going through, in, like, let's say high school, there was very little. I mean, yeah, there were people who were religious and still went to church and things like that. But when I was like 30 and looking back at all these people I went to school with, who not one of them were religious, and now they're all religious. I'm like, that's an interesting development. And I got it. It was, the way I see this is, well, that's such a beneficial thing for us as youth, because I did it. I rejected all religion. I was just like, y'all a bunch of storytellers. You need to feel good about something. And however, because I had rejected all imagery of the metaphysical and on all those narratives, I came to a very deep spiritual understanding and an openness to all religions when I was around 19, 20. And I just went in and started looking at all of them. And because I had rejected, Catholicism, because that's supposedly what I was, had no choice in the matter, but I was baptized, and, I didn't jump through all the hoops. So, I'm pretty sure I'm going to hell as far as they're concerned, because I, didn't get confirmation and all that nonsense. But I rejected that religion and its ritual. However, it brought me back in having the spiritual experiences that I had. And in looking at all religions, I was able to embody the principles of all these religions and ways of looking and thinking about the world and humans and human relationships and communities, that I had this tremendous admiration and value for Christianity. I'm like, it's like, I get it now. It's not about the imagery, because y'all get so attached to it, people push it away. You get so attached to the dogmatic elements of it that anyone who thinks outside that box is going to reject it, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because if in rejecting it, you're still open to spirit or spirituality or metaphysical, something beyond what science can measure, right? If you're open to that, well, then you may have a profound spiritual experience which will turn you around and have you appreciate. It's because I don't belong to a particular religion, but I have a tremendous amount of respect and value for religions, many of them. You know, I can
actually have a lot of people that think I'm deeply religious because, or from whatever religion they prescribe to, and that's because I've adopted the principles.
Right.
I've read through some of the stuff. I've investigated. I'm like, yeah, it's actually like these guys had it right. I'm gonna love my neighbor. I'm gonna go through life doing unto others as I want to be treated and stuff. I'm like, those things are immensely valuable.
Right.
And I've intentionally chosen them. But in listening to you talk, I do have a question, because if we look at humanity collectively, at least in the United States, like a teenager, it almost feels like what we're going through with the attachment to ideology and the increased polarization that's been going on for decades. This is not just like 2020 new. Is that us in a process of shaking off our attachments and ideologies to religion since 60s, 70s, and
you can go back,
and then shifting our ideology to science, to politics, to whatever, and really, like an addict, not dropping the attachment, but just shifting them to a different place.
Right. And again, it's that feeling of safety and security. That's you've focused on having something else make you feel safe and secure. So
it's like when I quit smoking cigarettes, I found out I took up caffeine.
Right.
And I stopped that, and I realized I was drinking a beer every day all of a sudden. And I'm like, whoa, where's this all coming from?
Right.
I cut that out, and all of a sudden I'm like exercising more than I usually would. And it's like my body almost needed, or had created a need for putting that addiction somewhere.
Right.
Into something, attaching to something. And I do notice it with needing an explanation, needing a meaning, needing an ideology, needing to understand and make sense of the world.
Right.
Ooh, we got some comments.
We got a heckler, Trisha.
Who's the anti-master?
Okay, so yeah, and I felt like this was the reason I brought this up. This chat screen was because I was like, okay, yes, this is still relevant to what you were just saying. It's actually hard for me to read it on the screen. So, if I'm different from you, then I matter. I don't know why, but this seems to make sense. The prefixes anti and pro give value to the self, I think. Separation makes me unique and important. Not true. But people in general don't hold themselves as important within themselves. Maybe? So
maybe.
And yes, absolutely. Because you were asking like why they would attach to one group or another. And mostly this has to do with personality. And we all have what I'll call our archetypical strengths, aspects of our personality that would have us gravitate towards one ideology or another. Now, it doesn't mean that because of that personality, you would completely hold that ideology. And in most cases, it's never true. I would venture to say that there isn't an ideology out there that a human being could just go, yes, I accept all of that. I believe in all of that. I support all of that.
Except for the cult leader.
Yeah. But it takes work to get you there. It takes work to get you there. So, yes, the labels, right? This is pigeonholing the labels. And but
more than that, the need to feel unique and important.
Which is which is funny because it's the opposite. It's that's what's happening. You're seeing with Oh, look at that. With this polarization, what you're seeing is a rejection of the individual, of individualism, right? And because there's all this group think and this group identity kind of uh, thinking that's happening, where it's like this whole the Black Lives Matter and the identity politics around, you know, trans and all this other stuff is it's not addressing the world as individuals. It's creating this separation into groups, and that everything is based on this group. And again, this goes back to
actually arguments against individualism.
It is. It absolutely is.
Yeah. No, there are direct claims that to treat people as individuals is not a good thing.
Yeah. Crazy to me.
Which there are some lines of thought where if you keep putting people in groups and then subgroups and all the intersectionalities, and you slice and dice it, you end up back at individualism.
Right. Right.
It's the opposite side of the same coin.
Yeah, because there's an infinite way of interpreting things, so you can
and an infinite way to divide people up.
Exactly. So at some level, and to me this comes back to the principles of it, and I hold, you know, dearly the individual freedom as a paramount to values for a functional society. Now, if you don't agree with that, then there's odds that, like, you're going to have different kinds of societies, right? And that's where you have culture. And so you have to be willing, if we're talking about what's the most functional, most workable worldview here, you have to be willing to question your own culture and your traditions and beliefs and new ones. Be willing to question all of these things. And if at the core of our questioning is a commonly held set of principles, well, then we can dissect these worldviews and go, look, this is not workable, this is not functional, and I can question this, even though, let's say, and again, this is happening so much in the political world that it's an easy target, but, you know, someone who is, you know, left-leaning, we'll say, is expected to have some beliefs. Now, the funny thing is, years ago, when I still had political beliefs, I would have put myself as a left-leaning libertarian, strong proponent of free market and a republic form of government. Not the political party Republican, but a republic. I do not believe in mob rule, and that's what I believe the benefit of a republic is. And because the masses, the mob, can basically, I love the example of democracy, and the problem with mob rule is when, you know, if you, me, and Bill Gates are, you know, standing around and you and I vote to take all Bill Gates' money, well, that's democracy. That's democracy in action, right? And we get all Bill Gates' money. However, when there's a core set of principles that you can lean on, right? That you can agree on, that we can say, like, look, we do hold life as sacred. We do believe that the health and well-being people within our community is important. We do believe that each individual should have the right, you know, to their labor, to their person, to not be violated in their individualism, right? If we could just come together, like, come up, because it doesn't even, I don't even think it would be a very complex list of principles, but if we held
No.
and agreed upon these principles, we could easily start to dissect and pull apart many of these ideologies and go, look, this doesn't work. This isn't
It's funny enough,
functional.
that's what religion does. Here's our 10 principles.
Right.
Here's our 7 principles.
Right.
Here's our whatever number.
Right.
And then we all align underneath that.
Right.
And I think really, like, we're adopting different aspects from psychology, from religion, from science, and we're collapsing the distinction of where they're coming from. And if we then choose to decide, let's add some principles to to any one of our movements or any one of our ideologies, and see if it holds up against the principles that we really want to stand for.
Right.
Then we can sort of fine tune and increase effectiveness around anything that we're wanting to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my dad's mostly black, and I've had a lot of people talking to me about the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm like, well, how come it's not like all lives or life or quality of life or individual freedom? Like, why specifically Black lives? And that conversation goes down, and I've even gotten attacked, saying not physically but verbally, labeled as like, you can't be colorblind, you can't be all lives can't matter until Black lives. So there's all kinds of
rhetoric,
phrases.
It's it's rhetoric
that come out, and at the end of it, it's like, okay, where's the principle? What are we standing for?
Mm-hmm.
And there's just more and more boogeymen.
Mm-hmm.
There's more and more things to fight in that form of movement.
Right.
But I haven't yet seen, and it's probably because my lack of interest to really dive too deep into it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more I do, the more I get called out for being ignorant or for not supportive or sympathetic to the cause. And I'm like, if anybody, and mind you, this is not coming from Black people.
Right.
But the more that, anyway, so all of it ends up for me in, I want to get behind something that I can truly believe in. And usually that's principle based. Mm-hmm. Or that would be something like a result that I want to see in the world.
Right.
Like, I want to see, whatever the result may be. And I could talk about politically or scientifically, like, say, I just really like the way this person talks about, like, my girlfriend was asking me if I was going to vote. And I'm like, well, I'm really trying to find a candidate, presidential election wise, that I would vote for, that I would really like get behind, that has some mission, that stands on principles and all of this stuff. And I've yet to find one. And so I'm trying to find one. And I was like, Andrew Yang kind of was the closest, because all he ever preached about was, hey guys, automation is going to cut off 95% of our jobs in the next few decades. We need to act now. He's like, I have a problem, I have a solution. I didn't necessarily agree with his solution, but the fact that the problem existed, and at a high potentiality of something, I was like, I could get behind working towards a problem. But I haven't seen much of that out there. So like, if really, around like political movements. And so the thing that I would really love, and that would get me behind stuff like Black Lives Matter, that whole movement, would be like, life matters. So we're not just going after making Black lives work, but that's just a human life issue. There's all kinds of injustices on every other race and color of we'd have to have the conversation about the death penalty for criminals to really see if we're behind life mattering in the first place. Right. And then I'm like, I could get behind this because I truly do believe that life matters. Right. Whatever color it is, whatever shape it is, that's a belief that I hold deeply, and a principle that I use to guide my life by.
Well, Gingy,
Even in not just politics.
You'd be a terrible person for modern day politics because you don't fit into any political category. You can't be.
I don't have a box.
You can't be pro-life and pro-progressivism. Those are opposed. If you're a liberal, if you're a progressive, well then you must be pro-choice, right? And
Maybe.
so
I don't know. I don't know enough about any of that stuff to really know whether I'd fit or not.
no, it's
All
but
I
here,
know
I'd
is
say that's
that
the problem.
if I
though.
see a principle, I can dive into it and fully support it and stand on it and preach on it.
Right.
But until I see the underlying principles, it's just theory. It's just concept. It's just complaining at certain points.
Right. Well,
that's it.
The problem is, I mean, politics isn't run on principles. Politics is run on policies. Those aren't the same thing. Policies and principles vary. Now, you could say that in general, conservatives have certain values, and in general, liberals have certain values, but it's not universal. And I think before anything, as a society, we have to agree on certain principles. Because if we leave politics up to determine what the values are, well, then you're just in for an endless war. Because politics is already divided based on personality, and you're not going to just
and that's what I was
transform
seeing with all
people.
Of that.
You're not going to.
That's what I was seeing with all of the BLM stuff, because I'm like, let's all get behind life matters, because as I see it now, you've got a group running around with signs being like Black Lives Matter, and all of a sudden you see a group coming out of nowhere being like white lives matter too, all lives matter as well, guys, and all these different lives, and then fetus lives matter, and it's just creating more and more conflict.
Right, but it shouldn't.
But if we're all
that's
like
the thing.
life matters,
yeah, it shouldn't.
It's like then all of these lives do matter.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying by saying Black lives matter that white lives don't matter, or that all lives don't matter.
Right.
Like, but you kind of are.
Right.
At least that's the way it's being interpreted by other groups.
Right. And but that's
like,
just,
well,
but that's just it.
like
See, again, you're venturing off, Gingy. You're venturing off into the world of politics, and don't look for rhyme or reason in the world of politics, because it is all about a set agenda, policies, things like that. So
I'm looking for the underlying principles.
Right. And
show me the guiding forces here.
Right. And I feel that once we're clear as human beings, like what we value, what our principles are, then we can break free of the ideologies. You know, you can still vote for whoever you're going to vote for, but to buy in hook, line, and sinker to these poisonous ideologies, and they're all poisonous. I'm not saying, right bad, left good, or left bad, right good, or anything like that. All ideologies at their core are poisonous because they're not open. They're set. And so you're not open to ideas. It's tribalism. It's you've carved out a little space of what to think, and you don't question any of it. And that's dangerous. That's poisonous. That is, I think we're moving. This is a perfect time to move into summation. I'm gonna give you my here's my conclusions based on this conversation. So, in conclusion, religion isn't wrong or bad. Science isn't wrong or bad. Psychology isn't wrong or bad. And all ideologies may have something of value to contribute. And if we are open and question and think and set ourselves a set of ethics, morals, values that as a community we all can stand behind, well, then we can look at all these contributions to humanity, because there is tremendous value in all of them. And we can construct a way of looking at the world, a worldview that allows for there to be the material science, for there to be psychology, for there to be religion in a way that conforms to those values that we hold. We can't allow for thoughts, for ideologies that are destructive, either to the individual, to the family, to the community, to the nation state, or to the world, or to the planet itself. We need to take all these things into consideration. And only when because if you attach into one ideology, absolutely it's going to become destructive. Absolutely. Because you're not open to different ways of looking at things. And there is no ideology that takes it all in, because for one, ideologies are always going to attract certain types of personalities. And so each ideology becomes an echo chamber for those personality types. And so there's always going to be division in ideological schools. So I say the best way I feel for us to approach the world is to free ourselves of our ideologies, let go of the labels you have for yourself, right? I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. Again, I'm not saying don't vote, and I'm not saying vote how you feel you should vote, but it's the first step in freeing yourself of ideology is freeing yourself of those labels that you try to pigeonhole yourself with, right? And even like labeling yourself as, well, I'm this race and I'm from this country and I'm from, like, again, go ahead, be proud of where you're from, whatever. But as soon as you start identifying as these labels and attaching to these labels, well, then it becomes harder and harder to let go of the ideologies that go with those labels. So freeing ourselves of ideology, freeing ourselves of these labels, these identities that we associate ourselves with, will free us to worldviews that can contribute to our own, that we can build a better world for ourselves as individuals, a better world for our families, and a better world for the community at large. That's my piece on it. What you got, Gingy?
So, my big takeaway, I don't really see any issue with the labels. I don't see any issue with the movements, politics. What I'm noticing most out of this entire conversation is that in attaching to a label specifically and only, not just label, but an ideology, a specific idea, even by attaching to anything really and expecting permanence or righteousness or truth or something, it almost creates an impossibility. So I'm noticing that if we align to principles instead of labels and ideas and whatever else, those principles can help navigate and guide and create intentionality within ideologies, so that the principle of life can account for and support all types of life. To have a principle of I even want to say quality of life, or freedom or empowerment. If we get behind concepts like this, then we can check them. They're not even concepts, behind principles like this, things that can help guide through ideology, so we can say, well, I like the morals of religion, and I like the scientific method, and I like challenging my belief systems and investigating my own consciousness through psychology. You can't get all of the human experience from any one method or any one ideology. or even really like a specific collective of ideologies, because there's always more stuff coming out. There's always new things. Like one of the comments was like, before 2020, there was no such word as anti-masker. I'm like, new stuff is going to be coming out over and over and over. And without some foundation, I'm calling principles, to help guide through that, we will polarize. We will fight against each other. We will defend our positions to the death because we don't know anything else. We don't know, like someone coming up and saying, hey, Gingy, here's a new ideology. Me being like, well, that's in conflict with mine. And I run back to where I'm comfortable.
Right.
Like I will sit there and defend my home and my identity and whatever else that's there to the death, because I don't know anything different outside of that ideology. Now, if I dissect and I can say, well, actually, this new thing that they've got, I like parts of it. It actually confirms some of the stuff I have over here. Like if all the religions put together all their principles in one bucket, there wouldn't be hardly any conflict, if any at all.
It would actually be it'd actually be a pretty small bucket because a lot of them hold the same principles. You know, there's very
and if that bucket got combined with the scientific principles,
right.
It'd be like, okay, well, actually, we're all pretty much on the same page here. What we're fighting about are the abstractions, and to me, that's pointless. We're all on the same page fundamentally, and that to me is the big takeaway from this entire conversation.
Yes, very well said. And I will reiterate the point you made, that it's an extremely important part of that would be letting go of the need to be right, letting go of the need to belong and feel safe, and to stand. Be willing to stand as an individual. I guess that it's funny because I didn't really put it together till just now that destroying how to destroy your planet in 5 easy steps. Well, I'd say one of the necessary steps is destroying the individual. Because if the individual ceases to think and act from their own thought, it becomes extremely destructive. Or it can become extremely destructive.
I was going to say maybe. I don't think that's an absolute there. I think there are ways for people to identify collectively and be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, but what that requires is conversation and openness and change and things like that. It doesn't really work. Yeah, and not like and a lack of righteousness. Like you can't be attached to being right about something. You can't be attached to, feeling safe and secure or belonging to something, because then you're not going to question. So the necessity to question, to have conversation, to debate is absolutely essential. But that only really happens if there's individuals. You have to have an individual way of looking at things, an individual way of thinking about things in order for there to be conversation and debate and growth. So just wanted to reiterate that as well. Let me show Sebastian's comment. I think this was my favorite episode out of the 2 so far. It seems like you're just digging deeper as you go. Well, thank you. Out of the 2 that we've done, Sebastian suggests that this is our best one yet. Well, let's hope we can keep that trend going. All righty. Well, thank you for joining us on phenomenosophy. Say that 10 times fast. Phenomenosophy. Phenomenosophy. All righty, y'all. Enjoy.
It's a new intro.
May the force be with you.